Well, hello there. This is Amy Stone of Amy Says So, and I'm going to talk about this idea that shows up in some places where I hang out that being a stepmom is the hardest job. There is this idea that shows up in online spaces for step parents frequently, specifically stepmoms, which is that being a step parent is the hardest job, specifically stepmoms. This is where I see this show up the most. I recently talked to somebody who heard me talk about this on my podcast, and she was real upfront. She was like, I wanted to really disagree with you. She said that when she was in it, experiencing the hard times, it really just felt very, very hard. But that when she listened to me talk about this, it was helpful. It was helpful. So it can be very hard. That is true, but stick with me. But I hope that what I'm going to share today might be helpful for you if you're in this. So I do see this most often when people who are in the business of selling things, services, and products to stepmoms and stepparents will make a social media post that begins with, being a step parent is the hardest job, or it's so unfair that being a stepmom is the hardest job. And then the next part is, so you should buy the thing that I'm selling to help. Right. So these are coaches and magazines and whatever that are selling services to unhappy, stressed out step parents. And sometimes these step parents might really be feeling overwrought, and looking for somebody who will sympathize with this position is not a bad thing. Right. And still, I'm going to tell you that I disagree. And this does make people unhappy sometimes. I'm going to climb up on my soapbox and tell you why this jumps out to me as something that's worth picking apart. The reason is that when vendors and companies are using this as an idea to resonate with you, they are positioning you as the victim, right? And you are in this hardest job. And in my opinion, that's not a helpful idea. It's positioned as helpful, but it's like picking a scab. It just draws your attention to something that already hurts, but picking the scab doesn't help it heal. Okay, this is a little bit ranty as a thing, so I apologize for that in advance, but stick with it, see if it has some value for you. Step parenting kids was not a job for me, right? I don't know about you. Maybe your experience was different. I don't get paid or a paycheck for being a step parent. There's no official job description. I didn't meet with HR to start doing this. No contract, no terms of starting or finishing. It's not actually a job, right? Maybe you are getting paid to be a step parent. I mean, that's great, right? Are you? I'm kidding a little bit, right? But I do think that words are powerful. And so it's helpful to keep in mind that it's not a job. For most people who are in this role, it is a choice. It doesn't always feel like a choice, but at some point there was a choice. It's an identifier for who we are, for the role we inhabit in our family of choice. And even the word step parent is a choice. Some people do not call themselves that. They call themselves bonus moms, or there are other titles that go here, right? So that is one issue. And I'm going to go over two others. The next one is the choice of the word hardest when it is used, right? Not, you would see varieties of variants of this where they wouldn't maybe use the word hardest, and maybe I wouldn't have as much of an opinion about that. But the word hardest to me does have a specific thing, not hard or harder or challenging or tough or a lot, but using the word hardest is very specific, right? If something is the hardest, then that implies that there's literally nothing in the entire world that is as hard as being a stepmom. And I want you to ask yourself, is that true? Now, it might be, right? It might be. I don't think it has been for me. I think that in my experience, there are actually lots of things that could be significantly harder. If we're going to use the moniker of a job, there are two careers that I've heard have very high suicide rates. Air traffic controller and veterinarians, I believe, are the two that have some of the highest. And so, if people are literally choosing to end their lives under the pressure of those occupations, I think that's harder than what I'm doing. right? So I'm also going to say that in my experience as a step parent, I don't think it's even the hardest kind of caregiving. Now, I want to quantify this a little bit because you could be listening to this, watching this, and your exact position could be the most challenging thing I've ever heard of. And I don't share this or have this as a way of minimizing what you're going through, right? I mean that your position could be different, your experience could be different than mine. But in my experience, by itself, just automatically becoming a step parent, I don't think that's harder than caring for a spouse or a sibling or a parent or a child who is terminally ill, right? Or I just don't. I happen to have a longtime acquaintance whose spouse had early onset Alzheimer's. And for over a decade, this family lived with that situation, watching somebody that they loved and cared for go through that hardship. And I think that's much harder than anything that I experienced as a stepmom. I also don't think that being a step parent by itself, with no other things added to it, is be as harder or the hardest thing when compared to being in a lot of very challenging parenting situations. I know adults who have children that they have lost in a variety of ways, car accidents, fatal diseases like leukemia. I have a very good friend whose adult child is autistic, and same person, autistic, and has two different kinds of cancer that they live with. And I can say from one to one experience, I don't think that my time as a step parent compares at all to the unrelenting challenge that that person is going through. That's just my opinion and my experience. Maybe I just know a lot of people that have hard stories. My intention here is not to minimize your personal situation if you're going through something hard. Quite the opposite, actually. I happen to think that using the word hardest actually devalues or minimizes the actual challenges that you are experiencing, right? So when you say that something is the hardest, it implies that there's something else going on there. So the thing that makes this fall apart to me in the end is that if you say that it's the hardest, that implies that there is some other alternative reality where it should be easy, right? Where caregiving and step parenting and being a spouse should be easy. That because you're not experiencing it as easy, you're doing something wrong. And I don't think that's accurate, right? I think that saying that this is the hardest job says that it's built into just the inherentness of being a step parent, that it can only ever be hard, and that the hardness is built into that word step parent. And this to me allows a person to potentially say to themselves, okay, it's not me. It's that step parenting is just the hardest. And I think that throwing that label of, oh, it's the hardest can sometimes be used to just abdicate any personal responsibility in the situation. All right. So people don't love it when I say this, right? You may hate it when I say that I don't agree with this, and that's okay, because it actually means that maybe I'm just not a good fit for you as somebody who would help you walk through this situation, which is important to know, right? Because you might really, really be looking for somebody that is going to tell you that you cannot be happy in this role because the role itself is just too hard. That's not who I am. I don't think that people need to stay in the role of step parent if they're miserable, but I also don't think that it does anybody any good to just blame the role all by itself. Being a step parent can be very challenging. So are so many other things that people choose to do. I don't know how many times I questioned whether or not I agreed with my choice to be a step parent over the last 25 years. It was probably a lot, and it's probably better that I didn't keep track. But for me, part of my path to finding happiness in my life is owning the choices I make. And it's usually empowering to do that. But whereas swimming in the sea of it's too hard feels kind of yucky. And so that's not what I do. Um, and that's what I have for you today. If this resonates with you, I'd love it if you gave me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. There is a matching podcast for this that you can find anywhere you listen to podcasts. And I encourage you to go to amysaysso.com and check out all the other resources I might have. Thanks for watching.